Guns are an interesting thing, aren't they? They're deeply entrenched in a big part of our culture. I got this gun for my 8th grade graduation present. That perhaps seems early. Let me tell you what, I got my first .22 rifle when I was 4, but I wasn't allowed to take it out by myself until I was 7. Now that was a different time, a different culture, my family, but I have been taught gun safety and have taught gun safety to my people for a long time. That's what I want to talk about today. So I'm not a firearms expert. I've never received any technical training except for a hunter safety course when I was 11 years old. But I've shot a lot of rounds, and I've made a couple of mistakes with guns, which, by the grace of God, did not have terrible ramifications. I've learned gun safety because of time spent with guns, because of bequeathing and providing guns for my sons and daughter, and because I've realized as I've gotten older what a burden of responsibility comes to anyone the moment they pick up a firearm. Let's equate guns with tools for just a second. So if you are new to guns, or if you've got a little boy or a little girl or a grandson or a granddaughter, or you would like your bride to become familiar with guns, or who knows, maybe you're in a position where you need to make someone acquainted with firearms, a single shot rifle or a single action revolver is a great place to start because they are so intuitive and understandable. They are a simple tool. In the same way that an axe is a simple tool, you pick it up and you can tell right away, here's the part that will hurt me. Here's the part I hold on to, and the last thing I want to do is get this thing in contact with my toes or shins. A single action revolver is understandable in that way. Now the contrast to that is maybe a semi-automatic pistol. This thing is not as intuitive. Sometimes it's hard to understand, what am I going to do to make this thing go bang, and how am I going to tell when the thing is safe? That maybe could be sort of made equivalent to a skill saw, or some other power tool that you pick it up, and if you're not an expert, you're not sure how it's going to hurt somebody. Don't start with a semi-automatic handgun. They are tricky. There's a very short list of rules that pertain to firearms that must never, ever be violated or forgotten. The first one of those is every gun is always treated as if it was loaded. If you always assume that every gun is loaded, you're never going to make the mental mistake of treating that gun as if it can't hurt you. So all you're giving up is a little bit of flexibility in order to ensure a whole bunch of safety. If a gun's loaded, you treat it considerably differently than if you think it's empty. I've seen grown people, let me be more specific and say grown men, because in most of my gun use, I'm interacting with men or boys who are handling firearms. I've seen them pick up a gun and wave it around like it's the remote control on their Xbox. Right then, the party stops. The instruction is made clear. If you're going to treat that gun like that, either you or I are leaving this site right now. It's always a mistake to pick up a gun and not treat it like it's loaded. So there's a characteristic of human nature that is described like this: familiarity breeds contempt. Now, how does that apply to guns? I'll tell you. It applies to guns in the same way it applies to motorcycles. You buy a kid a motorcycle, and when he gets on it, he's afraid. He's nervous. He thinks, I'm going to get hurt. And you know what? He will never get hurt as long as he feels that way. But as soon as that kid begins to think, I've got this. I'm a rider. I can do pretty much whatever crosses my mind on this thing, that young man or young woman is in line for some broken bones and some road rash or worse. It's the same with guns. So there's a collectability aspect. I mean, they've got to be stored somewhere, preferably in a gun safe, someplace secure. And you get them out from time to time and you clean them. And as you become familiar with how the gun feels, you lose track of how dangerous the gun is. And pretty soon you're treating it like you're picking up a bar of soap, for crying out loud. That's the type of a mindset that is almost always present when someone gets hurt with a gun accidentally. So here's a rule of thumb. Anytime you touch a gun, as your fingers close around the grip, as you begin to decide whether to put your finger inside the trigger guard or outside, radio off, baby. Every portion of your faculty, every thought should be centered on What am I going to do with this now? And what direction is this gun pointing? Let's talk about muzzle control. No one was ever accidentally shot by a gun that was not pointed at them. Where the muzzle is where the barrel opens and it implies the direction the barrel is pointing. If the muzzle is pointed in a safe direction, nothing bad can happen. If it is not pointed in a safe direction, something bad could happen. The bottom line is, as it pertains to muzzle control, if your muzzle is controlled at all times, you are a safe gun handler. If it's not, you're not. So the reality that muzzle control is key to gun safety explains why a handgun is inherently more dangerous than a long gun or a rifle. And that is, if you're holding a rifle, it's hard to lose track of where the muzzle is pointed because the barrel is, it ranges from 18 inches to long. Okay, so it's pretty easy to keep track of where it's pointed. A handgun, on the other hand, just a small movement of your wrist or an elevation or declension of your forearm can radically change where that short muzzle is pointing. It makes muzzle control a much more specific and instantly changed dynamic in a handgun than with a rifle. Boom, 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 boom. I have completely changed the field of potential injury of the muzzle on this pistol with just a moment's inattention or a small movement. It's why handguns are so effective for defense, because you can cover a wide range, a wide field with small movements, and it's why beginners hurt themselves or other people with handguns if they're not trained concerning muzzle control. One of the ways that muzzles get out of control with pistols is you pick it up, you raise it. Now right here, you're bringing it up into an area where it could threaten someone. And then if you turn your body and you lose track of the fact that as your body turns, the gun is turning. As you turn your body, you can unconsciously shift your muzzle in a direction where it is threatening someone. And even an empty gun is threatening someone. Not only does an empty gun provide a direct and personal threat to that person in that moment, but it changes the atmosphere of the site to where everyone could, if they followed your lead, sort of relax about gun control and muzzle control because, gee, this guy's waving it around like it's a kite on a string. I guess I don't have to pay that much attention. So not only does your inattention threaten that person, but it can threaten everyone around you by changing the perception of the appropriate way to handle a gun. Now, of course, there are a lot of gun safety rules, and let me reiterate this. I am not a gun safety instructor. I'm not a marksmanship instructor. I'm a guy who's used guns. And so what I'm telling you is the way that I approach and have taught my people about gun safety. The first thing you do when you pick up a gun is check to see whether or not it's loaded. Different types of guns do that in different ways. You're sure it's empty. You treat it like it's loaded. If you forget that, eventually you could well have something to regret. The next thing is about the trigger. Now there's lots of conversation about what you should do with your trigger finger when you put it inside the guard and make contact with the trigger. Okay, that's all good conversation, and I'm not here to give you my opinion on that, except never forget about where the trigger is. And that includes this. I do not believe in dry firing a gun. I almost never do it. Now, there are reasons and there are training courses and there's the whole thing about relieving the tension on the spring, and there's the whole thing about understanding where the trigger pull happens and what weight the trigger pull is, and yeah. But here's what a casual approach to pulling the trigger will lead to. Pretty soon you're picking it up and you're snapping it off here and there like you're in a video game. In general, for me, Wadsworth Family Gun Safety, don't dry fire that thing unless you've got a darn good specific reason to do it. Don't make it your standard practice. Get on a range, get in a safe spot, put some ammunition in there and practice. That's where the place is to practice your trigger pull and the mechanism, and don't casualize any part of handling a firearm. First, treat every gun like it's loaded. Now the corollary to that is you immediately make sure that it's empty when you pick it up, but you always, always treat every gun like it's loaded. Second, muzzle control. If you control the muzzle, you will never have any reason to regret anything that happens with a gun that's under your control. And then the third thing is the trigger. You keep your finger away from the trigger unless you intend to shoot that thing. If there's ever a time in your life that you need to spend some serious mental energy thinking about personal responsibility, it's when you become a gun owner or when you pick up somebody else's gun. So I have a profound gratitude and appreciation for my right to own and use guns. I like it. And I expect that you do too. Here's the mistake we make too often, is we claim the right and abdicate the responsibility. There's a responsibility that comes with that. And so my responsibility, and maybe you can accept this as yours too, is to encourage everybody that I come in contact with in the context of using guns to be safe, to understand it for myself, and encourage the people around me when guns are part of the conversation or part of the activity. Man, here's how we do it safely. Here's how I do it safely. Maybe you could step that up. Look for chances to do that. So here's one of the terrific things about YouTube, and that is you can learn anything you want. So you figured out I'm not a gun safety expert. I'm a guy that has guns. But man, there are some crackerjack gun instructors on YouTube. They fill that space beautifully. They can answer any question authoritatively and probably in more detail and in a more satisfying way than you just heard from me. So if you want to learn more about gun safety, dive in, learn about it. Maybe you'll become an instructor, I don't know, but in the meantime, you'll know what you need to know to use these cool tools safely and responsibly.